Good. Obviously, a lot of this cheers me up. It's good to see everybody out here having a really good time. There's so many people that put in so much time and effort to make this weekend amazing, and this is.
It was a moment that sent ripples through the world of women's basketball and beyond, a moment that no one wanted to see. Yet one that reminded fans, players, and league officials of the physical toll the game can exact even on its brightest stars. Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever's sensational rookie guard, had been the heartbeat of the team's offense, the face of the franchise, and, arguably, the most talked-about athlete in all of women's basketball. When the news broke that Clark had suffered a left quadriceps strain and would be out for at least 2 weeks, the silence among fans was deafening, as though the wind had been knocked out of the season itself. There had been whispers about fatigue, about the brutal schedule she'd been navigating ever since her historic collegiate run at Iowa came to a close, but no one expected this. Her injury was not just a setback for Indiana's season, it was a seismic event for the entire WNBA, an unfortunate turning point that underscored how heavily the league's visibility, ratings, and cultural momentum were resting on the shoulders of a 22-year-old phenom barely a few months into her professional career. For the Indiana Fever, the loss of Caitlin Clark was devastating on multiple levels. On the court, she was not just a playmaker, she was the team's compass. Her presence changed defensive schemes, opened up opportunities for teammates, and gave Indiana a fighting chance in every game. She made the impossible passes look routine and the deep threes feel inevitable. Clark's court vision, relentless pace, and command of the game were unlike anything the Fever had seen in years. The team had struggled mightily in previous seasons, often missing the playoffs and struggling to find a stable identity, but Clark's arrival had rewritten that narrative overnight. With her, the Fever felt like a reborn franchise. Ticket sales soared, merchandise flew off the shelves, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Indiana games became marquee events. Her absence during the May 28th loss to the Washington Mystics wasn't just noticeable, it was glaring. The offense looked disjointed. Ball movement was sluggish. Players who normally thrived off Clark's ability to create space and distribute struggled to generate opportunities on their own. The Fever, who had been on the rise, suddenly seemed adrift, and yet, the true magnitude of Caitlin Clark's absence extended far beyond the hardwood in Indiana. Across the country, in cities where fans had never before tuned into a WNBA game, her name had become synonymous with the league itself. Ratings had hit unprecedented highs. Social media engagement was off the charts, and children, girls and boys alike were imitating her moves on playgrounds and in driveways. She wasn't just a rising basketball star. She was a cultural movement. She had brought in new viewers who previously hadn't cared for women's sports, who now proudly wore her jersey and debated her highlight reels with fervor usually reserved for NBA icons. Her story, from small-town Iowa legend to national collegiate record breaker and now WNBA sensation, had captured hearts. She was the kind of generational talent who didn't just raise her own ceiling, she lifted an entire league with her. So when she went down with the quad injury, it wasn't just a basketball narrative being interrupted, was the engine of the league's growth stalling in real time. Media outlets scrambled to adjust coverage. Networks, once reliant on the guaranteed numbers a Fever broadcast brought in, now faced the reality of declining viewership. The gravity of her absence was so profound that even veteran analysts, who had seen the league weather all kinds of storms, expressed concern not just for Indiana's trajectory, but for the league's short-term momentum. Still, what was perhaps most striking was how the fan base responded not just to her injury, but to what it represented. One might have assumed that the Fever's games would see a massive drop-off in engagement, that without Clark's dazzling passes and buzzer beaters, fans would tune out. But something surprising happened. On May 29th, a day after the injury was made public, Doug Feinberg of the Associated Press posted the ratings from the Fever's loss to the Mystics, a game Clark didn't play in. The numbers, though slightly down, were still robust. Comment, guess people are fans no matter who, struck a chord. It revealed something deeper, something more hopeful. Caitlin Clark, in her short time in the league, hadn't just amassed fans for herself. She had helped build fans for the game. By introducing millions to the WNBA, by pulling back the curtain on the talent, skill, and competitiveness that had always been there but seldom seen, she had done more than fill seats. She had changed perceptions. Fans now knew names like Aaliyah Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and Nolissa Smith. They knew the Fever's bench rotations and the strengths of their front court. They started paying attention to rivalries, to playoff implications, to storylines that had existed long before Clark's arrival but had never received the spotlight they deserve. And that's the beautiful irony in all of this. Caitlin Clark, by becoming the face of the league, had helped erase the notion that the league needed a single face to survive. Her charisma and gravity had pulled millions into the orbit of the WNBA, and now, even in her absence, the momentum hadn't completely collapsed. That's not to say her absence wasn't felt, of course. It was. The Fever lost games they might have otherwise won. Casual viewers may have skipped a few broadcasts, but the seeds had been planted. The narrative had been reshaped, and perhaps, for the first time in a long time, the WNBA felt less like it was relying on one player to carry it forward, and more like it was finally ready to run as a collective. Still, questions remained. Would Clark's injury linger beyond 2 weeks? How would the Fever adjust in her absence? Could the coaching staff retool the offense in a way that didn't rely so heavily on her orchestration? Would her minutes be monitored more strictly upon return to prevent further injury? And perhaps more pressingly, what did this mean for the league's larger commercial and media plans? Sponsorship deals, endorsement campaigns, promotional strategies had all been riding a wave that was, at its core, Clark Powell. Her face was on billboards, her voice in ads, her highlights used to market entire broadcast packages. Could the league adapt quickly enough to avoid stalling out? Could other stars, many of whom had been waiting patiently in the wings for attention, step into the void and command the stage? Interestingly, some did. In the weeks following Clark's injury, players like Aja Wilson, Breena Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu and Arike Ogunboale rose further into the limelight. Their performances were electrifying, their leadership undeniable. Suddenly, fans who had first tuned in for Caitlin Clark were staying for the sheer level of play across the board. Debates erupted online about MVP candidates, team chemistry, and playoff seedings. The ecosystem was growing, diversifying, strengthening. And still, beneath it all, was the enduring influence of Clark, not forgotten. Not overshadowed, but elevated by the very movement she helped catalyze. As Clark worked through rehab, reporters caught glimpses of her determined demeanor. She wasn't sulking, she wasn't panicking. She knew the weight of the moment. She understood what her body needed and what the team required. She was methodical, in her return, focused not just on coming back, but coming back stronger, smarter, more prepared to handle the marathon of a WNBA season. In her interviews, she remained upbeat, supportive of her teammates, and intent on using the time away from play to improve mentally and emotionally. That attitude, professional, mature, resilient, only deepened the respect fans and analysts had for her. She wasn't just a star. She was a leader, and in the process, she proved once again that the story of Caitlin Clark wasn't just about points scored or games won, it was about legacy. And legacy, as everyone was starting to understand, isn't built in the spotlight alone. Sometimes, it's forged in the quiet determination to rise again after being sidelined. So as July turned to August, and whispers of her return began to grow louder, there was an electric sense of anticipation across the league. Fever fans were eager to see their point guard back on the floor. Opposing coaches were already drawing up defensive schemes. Commentators prepared for the ratings spike, and in homes across America, children began to practice her signature step-back three again, because Caitlin Clark wasn't just coming back, she was coming back to a league she had already helped reshape, to a fan base she had helped educate, to a future she had, in many ways, already defined. And even though she had been absent for weeks, her presence had never truly left. She was still there, in every rising stat, in every new fan, in every headline that no longer began with skepticism but with celebration. Her injury, painful as it was, revealed something profound, not just about her, but about the WNBA itself. That it is resilient, that it is growing, and that while Caitlin Clark may have been the spark, the fire now
active on the sidelines. I gotta cheer these two on. Chirp the other team.
Do you want this as a coach?
Yeah, Coach C.
Oh my God, Coach C, watch out.
The anticipation for every Indiana Fever game this season had become almost ritualistic, thousands tuning in, millions following live highlights, and networks scrambling to adjust their coverage schedules to maximize exposure for what had become must-see basketball, all due to one name, Caitlin Clark. Her impact was undeniable and sparked a true generational talent whose presence didn't just elevate a struggling Fever team but recalibrated the scale of visibility for the entire WNBA. So when she was suddenly ruled out with a left quadriceps strain, projected to be sidelined for at least 2 weeks, It wasn't just a blow to Indiana's playbook, it sent reverberations through the entire league and its surrounding ecosystem. Clark wasn't just a star in her own right. She was the gravitational center of a newly energized sports movement. Having carried Iowa to record-breaking NCAA numbers and helped push women's college basketball to new cultural heights, her transition into the WNBA came with enormous expectations, ones she was not only meeting but surpassing. And yet, with one injury, all that momentum faced its first real stress test. When the Fever took on the Washington Mystics on May 29th, the excitement that typically surrounded a Caitlin Clark-led game was replaced with a nervous kind of curiosity. How would the team function without her? How would fans respond? And most crucially, would the league's newfound audience stay engaged even without its brightest star? The results, though sobering, were also deeply revealing. According to Doug Feinberg of the Associated Press, the game drew 357,000 viewers on NBA TV, making it the 10th most-watched WNBA game in the history of the channel. On the surface, a celebratory stat. But context, as always, is everything. Just 9 days earlier, on May 20th, the Fever faced off against the Atlanta Dream. Clark was active in that game, and it was also broadcast on NBA TV. That contest drew 581,000 viewers. The contrast is clear. The May 29th matchup without Clark saw a 39% drop in viewership from the most recent comparable game where she was on the floor. A near 40% decline is staggering and not at all surprising. Clark's unique ability to command attention, both from die-hard fans and casual newcomers, had proven to be the league's greatest marketing engine. Yet, and this is where the story becomes much more complex and revealing, the 357,000 viewer figure was still strong enough to land in the top 10 all-time NBA TV broadcasts for the WNBA. This means that even without Caitlin Clark in the lineup, even without her iconic passes and logo threes, even without her magnetism pulling every camera her way, the Indiana Fever were still a draw. That shift speaks volumes. Because it means something changed. It means that the Caitlin Clark effect is not just about her, it's about the culture she's helped awaken. It's about fans who started watching to see her but stuck around because they began to see them, the whole team, the league, the competitors. The broader stories playing out across the WNBA landscape. Aaliyah Boston, last year's No. 1 pick, whose dominance in the paint is starting to catch national attention. Kelsey Mitchell's poise and lethal shooting. Nolissa Smith's growth on both ends. The Fever, for all their youth and inconsistency, had become a developing storyline that now existed even beyond Clark's orbit, and fans, perhaps for the first time in years, were beginning to understand the beauty of that evolution. The Fever's growth was no longer just a subplot in the Caitlin Clark show, was becoming a legitimate narrative in its own right. And, as for the league, these numbers presented a mixed, yet optimistic picture. Yes, Caitlin Clark's absence caused a sharp drop in viewers. And yes, the league's marketing and media push had been disproportionately dependent on her. But the residual impact, the fact that nearly 360,000 people still chose to tune in, suggested something powerful, that Clark had not just brought visibility to herself, but introduced a new demographic to the entire product. That many of these fans were now emotionally and intellectually invested not just in Clark's stardom, but in the outcome of games, in player rivalries, in franchise rebuilds and playoff implications. For decades, the WNBA has battled mainstream media neglect, unequal broadcast access, and a pervasive societal narrative that women's sports lacked entertainment value. But Caitlin Clark, by becoming a phenomenon no one could ignore, had forced a reckoning, and now, even in her absence, the ripple effects of that reckoning continued. Social media remained abuzz, with fans analyzing Fever possessions, debating rotations, and passionately defending players who, only months ago, existed in relative obscurity. And the networks, who once treated WNBA coverage as filler, were now grappling with a new reality. The women's game drew numbers, generated cultural conversation, and created sticky, loyal fan bases. The May 29th ratings proved something further, that even in diminished form, even without the golden child on the court, the league still held attention. That matters. That matters so much. Because the sustainability of the WNBA cannot rest on the legs of one player, no matter how transcendent. And though Clark's absence exposed the league's still fragile dependency on her, it also offered an opportunity to reorient, to widen the lens, to let the spotlight stretch, to build stars and moments beyond her reach. And credit to the fans, They showed up. Not all of them, not 581,000 of them, but enough to remind everyone that the base was building, that a true movement was underway. That legacy wasn't just about rating spikes, but about retention. Meanwhile, Clark, from the sidelines, remained her ever-engaged self-coaching teammates, studying tape, cheering plays, and embodying the maturity of a veteran far beyond her years. Her injury, a reminder of the physical toll and fragility that comes with being a high-usage, high-expectation athlete, was being managed carefully. No rushed return. No corner cutting, because Caitlin Clark knows her value is not just in the now but in the long haul. And while she healed, the WNBA found itself being tested and passing, not perfectly, but promisingly. This is what evolution looks like. Painful, revealing, but necessary. And when Clark returns, as she surely will, stronger and sharper than before, she won't just be rejoining a team or a league, she'd be stepping back into a transformed landscape, one that she helped spark, but which now contains multitudes beyond her own narrative. The ratings dip was real, but so was the resilience. And for the Indiana Fever, for the league, and for every girl watching who now knows her game is worth watching, that resilience may prove to be the most important stat of all.